Hi, everyone. Lovely to see you. Please, feel free to write in the chat your name, where you're from, if you're primary, secondary. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Please make sure that you use the chat just to introduce yourself, maybe name, where you teach, and which sector. That will be lovely. And then we'll just start in a couple of minutes. Hi, Nicola. Hi, Mary. Hi, Emily. Hi, everyone. Yeah, as I said, for those who are just joining us, please feel free to write your name in the chat, where you teach, if you teach primary, secondary, and we'll just start in a minute. Hi, everyone. Thank you for those who are introducing, themselves on the chat. If you've just joined us, please make sure that you write your name, where you're from, which languages do you teach. It's lovely to see so many of you here this afternoon on a Sunday. I don't know what's the weather like, for you, but I'm in the northwest and it's raining outside, very grey and raining. Okay, so I will share my slide now, and then we'll make a start. Okay, so hopefully all of you can see my screen. So my name is Jennifer Wozniak-Rush. I'm assistant head teacher for teaching and learning. I'm teaching French and Spanish in a secondary school in East Lancashire. Feel free to ask, some questions. If I can please ask you to put the questions in a Q&A, so then it's easier for me at the end just to have a look at it. So the session tonight, this afternoon, is about inclusive classroom and how to best support SEND pupils in the MFL classroom. First of all, just talking about the Association for Language Learning, I'm a proud member of the ALL, which is just such a fantastic and supportive association. And if you're not a member yet, I would strongly advise you to become one. Okay, so let's just start my session. So first of all, I think it's really important to start with the fact that pupils with SEND must remain in the MFL classroom and not be removed. Pupils with SEND can access learning another language just like any other pupils. And what is key is to look at strategies to ensure that they can access the same curriculum as others, have really great expectations, developing skills, and make progress. So I have put here on the slide a list of research and evidence that you can look at if you want to know more about it. So let's have a look, first of all, at some of the evidence. So my session will first be based a tiny bit about research and then some practical ideas that you can use in the classroom. So having a look at the evidence from the All School SEND's Teachers Handbook, I would like to start with this quote. So as the teacher of a learner with special educational needs and or disabilities, you have the opportunity to make a significant difference. Enabling all learners to do well within our inclusive school system is every teacher's responsibility. And as teachers, this is our responsibility to ensure that all our pupils, including those with SEND, achieve the best they can, but most importantly, are given the same opportunities as others. Why should they have less opportunities than the other pupils? And all teachers are teachers of SEND. And as the SEN Code of Practice from 2015 stipulates teachers are responsible and accountable for the progress and development of the pupils in their class, including where pupils access support from teaching assistants or specialist staff. So all the research, whether it is the teacher handbook for SEND, whether it is the SEND code of practice, or if it's the EF guidance report on special educational needs in mainstream schools, they all suggest the same. And what they suggest is that the main factor for success is high quality teaching. And here, as you can see on the screen, I just put some of the key messages from it. So it's talking about, making sure that, we provide the best for all our pupils, that we make all our pupils, we are responsible and accountable for the progress of all our pupils. It's all linked with high quality teaching. But then, as I said later on, I will show you some very practical ideas to make sure that this is happening in all our classes. So to quote again the SEND code of practice, high quality teaching differentiated for individual pupils is the first step in responding to pupils who have or may have SEND. And additional intervention and support cannot compensate for a lack of good quality teaching. So the more we can do through high quality teaching and inclusive classrooms, the less we need to intervene for individual pupils. So when planning all class teaching, it's important to use approaches that are effective for learners with SEND. As actually, if we think about our SEND pupils, first of all, if we think about that, what we're doing for them is actually going to help every single of our pupils, not only those with SEND. So the approaches really that I'm referring to here are the ones that I've put on the slide. So learning in small steps, so we know how important it is in MFL, to learn in small steps. Building learning upon their prior knowledge, so making sure, but as I said, that will help the pupils with SEND, like it will help any other pupils. Giving clear instructions, especially if you teach, in the target language, thinking about, the instructions that you are giving. If you give too many instructions at once, it can be overwhelming for the pupils and they might not even remember what was a stage one. So something very easy that I do, like for example, when I introduce a new activity that the pupils do not know, I make sure I've got all my instructions on the board, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if after I've given the instructions, the pupils can't remember where they needed to start, it's there on the board and they can refer to it. Checking for understanding obviously is very important, but that's important for all our pupils, not only those with SEND, but it's part of high quality teaching. Modeling, so pupils know what is expecting of them. Okay, so we know how important, modeling is. Using real life examples as well can be very, very powerful. And providing scaffolding to support the pupils. And here, obviously, some of our SEND pupils will need some scaffolding, so just like some of our low attainers pupils, because it's not because you're low attaining that you're necessarily SEND, or you might be SEND and being, high flyer in MFL. So I think as well, it's for us to think about the difference, SENDs doesn't mean, low ability and, and vice versa. And it's just making sure that we provide that scaffolding to support all our pupils when needed. And then when appropriately, making sure that we remove that scaffold. Avoiding, cognitive overload. So it's more like thinking about the amount of vocabulary that you introduce at once, the amount of instructions that you give at once, and all those things. Giving a lot of opportunities to practice new learning so that knowledge and skills are more likely to be stored in the long-term memory. So how often do you ask your pupils to practice that new learning? Or as well, it's also thinking about, for example, what is it in the language that you teach that pupils do find difficult? Like, for example, in French, adjectival agreement, is something that you need to revisit all the time. So, like, for example, we look at adjectival agreement when we do in Year 7 personality, but then when we teach the topic of town, we revisit that and revisit it later. And it's making sure that whatever we know that our pupils find maybe challenging or more difficult, that we provide those opportunities to revisit as much as possible, but not only in one context, is as many different contexts as possible. Also giving pupils opportunities to recall what they have learned, which is also really important. But as I said, all those strategies are characteristic of high quality teaching in general, and they will enable all pupils, including those with SEND, to make progress. Then I just slightly wanted to mention very quickly the EEF, the 5-a-day. So the 5-a-day is actually, when you look at it, explicit instruction, cognitive and metacognitive strategies, scaffolding, flexible grouping, using technology. Well, that is already part of most teachers' practice and can be relatively easily added as well, meaning that small tweaks could make actually a significant positive difference for the pupils, we teach. So teachers should develop a repertoire of these strategies, which they can use daily and flexibly in response to individual needs, using them as the starting point for their classroom teaching. So the 5 strategies outlined here from the EEF were identified as having relatively strong evidence for their effectiveness in supporting pupils with SEND. So the first one, the explicit instructions, that refers to a range of teacher-led approaches. So when it's focused on teacher demonstration, followed by guided practice and independent practice. So making sure that you explain something, then you give opportunities for pupils to practice with you, so that's that guided one, and then asking the pupils to do it individually. So it's a bit like I do, we do, you do. One popular approach to explicit instructions is also part of Rosenshine's principles of instructions. So what we can do in MFL is to give plenty of worked examples with us modeling self-regulation and thought processes. So always explaining what we are doing and why we are doing it. So we might teach pupils, as I said, adjectival agreements, explaining the rules, given like plenty of examples, having maybe some visual aids to help pupils as well. And then we need to give pupils opportunities to practice. We need to make sure that we use examples and non-examples. We also should use a clear and ambiguous language. So if we give instructions in the target language, if you teach, in the target language, when always unsure that you have someone in the class, explaining then in English what you said. If it's, something that is is a bit more tricky. Or I know that some teachers speak in the target language, but for certain grammar aspect, if they realize that the class is not getting it, they will do that, in English, which is fine as well. So the second principle, when we are talking about cognitive and metacognitive strategies, those are skills such as, for example, memorization techniques. So metacognitive strategies help the pupils plan, monitor, and evaluate their learning. So one instance is when we chunk the task as this will support the pupil. So for example, we could have a checklist, of all the things that the pupils need to do. Or as I said before in my example, you could have, some instructions on the whiteboard, or provide just one question at a time. And this helps, obviously reduce distractions, to avoid, overloading working memory. So you could also have, like, for example, some prompt sheet to help pupils to evaluate their progress with ideas for further support. Then the third principle for the high quality teaching that will benefit pupils with SEND, but every single pupil as well, is a scaffolding. So scaffolding is temporary support that is removed when it is no longer required. So initially, you would provide enough support so that pupils can successfully complete tasks that they could not do independently. So for example, in MFL, I know that in some school, some teachers use sentence builders, or, we use writing frames, knowledge organizers. You can have structure strips, sentence starters, checklist of what to include, but all of that is part of, this scaffolding. Then in terms of the flexing grouping, so what do we mean by that? So it's when the pupils are allocated to smaller groups based on the individual needs that they currently share with other pupils. So such groups can be formed for an explicit purpose and disbanding when the purpose is met. So allocating temporary groups can allow the teacher to set up opportunities for collaborating learning, and also to help on a specific element that the pupils, might struggle with. And also using the technology, the fifth principle, if you want, that could really assist teacher modeling. So technology as a method to provide feedback to pupils can be very effective, especially when the pupil can act on this feedback, straight away. So for example, I don't know if you use that in your school, but in my school, in every single classroom, we've got a visualizer. So we use the visualizer, for example, to show an example of a really good paragraph, or sometimes I also use the visualizer. I'll just grab some books, put it on the visualizer, and I will mark, for example, a paragraph and explaining, if you want, how I mark it, so the pupil can also see my thinking process when I'm looking at it. Or you can just use the visualizer. Sometimes I just get a piece of paper and I just model a good answer, with the class. So visualizer can be used, or you can also use technology as a tool, to support teaching. So for example, I use quite a lot. I don't know if you know the website called Vocaro, Vocaro. And that can be used to record a spoken answer, and the teacher can then use it to give personalized verbal feedback. But it's very easy to use. You just got like a red button on your screen. You just click on it, you record it, and then you've got a link, and you can just send that link to the pupil. So I send it to the pupils via Teams, but also with my Key Stage 4, I download the QR code, and then they stick in their books, so then they can go back to it as much as they want. So let's also look at what we can do in our classroom to support cognition and learning, because we know that connection and learning can be something that some of our pupils with SEND struggle with. So in order to succeed in language classroom, pupils must feel safe enough to take risks and to make mistakes. So focusing on the learning behaviors, including those around mutual respect and support, and celebrating learning through mistakes and misconceptions as well. When establishing, your classroom routines is also, a very, very important. And celebrating that success for everyone in the classroom is key. So the teacher handbook for SEND suggests that we provide plenty of opportunities in the classroom to focus on communication. So what they mean, it's like building a very supportive environment in which speaking the language is emphasized through, for example, plenty of group and pair speaking tasks in which the learners often feel like more comfortable speaking, and a positive collaborative environment, is creating. So sometimes they don't feel as anxious as speaking in front of everyone, but just doing it with the person next to them makes them feel a bit more not as apprehensive, if you want. Having as well some game-orientated speaking tasks, which can help some learners, forget their anxiety and focus, attention. But I think when we're thinking about inclusive MFL classroom, understanding and getting to know our pupils is key. So really knowing your pupils. Do you know who, all your SEN pupils are? Do you know their targets? If they've got a care plan, do you know what strategies strategies you're supposed to use in the classroom, because you know, you might have the 3 pupils with ADHD in your class, but they might actually have different strategies that work, you know, for different pupils. So have you read those, you know, those plans? Knowing as well the reading age of your pupils, that is also really, really important, because that's going to help you know the type of questions that you can ask, you know, where they might struggle with, you know, where maybe more support will be needed, you know, and so on. But I think it's important that we challenge assumptions linked to learners' labels and understand how to build on each learner's strengths. So we strive to provide a broad and balanced curriculum that is inclusive and engaging, so that all pupils, regardless of their abilities and needs, thrive and achieve their potential. So as I said, you know, it's all those things that will make a difference. If their reading is an issue, then you know, for instance, use maybe more visual approaches in our all class presentation to keep them engaged. But all the teaching strategies we put in place, you know, as I said, and I will keep saying it in that session, will benefit, you know, all pupils, not only those with SEND. So when it comes to high quality teaching in MFL, we of course talk about challenge, explanation, questioning, modeling, feedback, practice, and all, you know, the essential parts of teaching. And I would really highly recommend reading The Rosenshine Principles in Action by Tom Sherrington, as well as Making Every MFL Lesson Count by James Maxwell. However, here in this session, I just want to remind us of simple, easy, but universal effective strategies. So let's just have a look at some easy wins. So, for example, using timers, you know, timers can be, you know, really useful for pupils to know. You know, the time that they've got for each session. You can download from the TESS website for free. It's called Countdown Timers for PowerPoint, and you've got some that are 10 seconds long, 15, 20, 30, 2 minutes, and I think it goes up to a 10-minute timer. But I think it's important to think about our planning, and instead of designing our lessons with the majority of the class in mind, starting from the pupils who are most likely to struggle with what we are teaching and need to focus on what we want to teach. So think about our expectations and then how to teach it based on the knowledge of our pupils to support our planning. So as well, think about, you know, I've mentioned just before, you know, when you're thinking about your seating plan, if you know your pupils, then your seating plan must refer to that. So being flexible and think about not only pupils with SEND, but thinking about your PP pupils, thinking about, you know, behavior. And I also take into consideration personality, because sometimes the personality of some of your pupils are very, very different. And you know that the combination of certain pupils next to each other will just not work. But everything is about aiming high. And it's about, you know, having really high expectations for all our pupils and making sure that they all meet our high standards, and not to lower expectations or project assumptions about what the pupils can do and cannot do, because sometimes, unfortunately, it's us teachers putting the lead on what the pupils can actually achieve. But if we believe that they can all do the best, then you know, actually most of the pupils will strive, you know, to that. Make sure as well that we've got pupils' attention throughout the lesson. So waiting, pausing until we have the attention of everyone is really, you know, really, really key. Having those clear routines as well to ensure that the learners, you know, refocus on all class teaching when required, but also so that they can regulate their own interactions and volume and work respectfully in all interactions. So expectations must be set. What are your expectations when you want the pupils to work with the person next to them? What are your expectations when you want the pupils to just listen to what you're saying? What is your expectations when you are modeling a good answer? What is your expectations when you ask someone a question? So making sure that this is crystal clear, and often we'll realize, although we've set our expectations at the beginning of the year, as we go throughout the year, you know, there's times where we need to remind our pupils of those expectations because they are kids and they just forget. You know, sometimes as well, when we talk about SEND, we need to think about a multisensory approach to practicing language. So thinking about, you know, the use of songs, speech, listening and reading tasks, as well as having like simple, lean resources that direct the attention rather than distract the attention. So think as well, but I know that we all do it, you know, when you teach vocabulary, you know, using actions, you know, some of those actions can really help our, you know, our pupils. It could, you know, some pictures, you know, to use as stimuli and so on. But what I think is really important is to make sure that we provide enough repetition in the classroom, and we know the importance of drilling the vocabulary that we are teaching, but also creating opportunities for pupils to then practice in pairs, you know, by doing a range of pair work activities. So like, for example, person A doing an action and person B has to give the word of the sentence in the target language, and then they swap. Or some of the pair work activities that I do, you know, one person will just mumble a word and the person next to them has to tell me, you know, which word it is, and then they swap. Or they love the telepathic game. So, you know, we've done like maybe introducing, you know, 7, 8 items of vocabulary. They are all on the screen. One of the pupils will just like think of a word, and I make them do like a little sound. So they do like ding when they're ready, when they've got a word that they're thinking of, and the person next to them just need to well, guess the word that the person next to them, you know, was thinking of. But it's just a good way of just practicing, you know, the vocabulary. There's loads and loads of different pair work activities that can be done to practice the vocabulary just introduce. But as I said, it's ensuring that we've got, we provide time for practice, because if the pupils do not practice what you are teaching them, how can you expect them to reuse it? They will not be able to reuse in speaking or in writing something that they have not practiced, that you have just introduced to them. So providing as well enough time for pupils to answer questions. So using, for example, think, pair, share is very powerful. Set a question with a goal and a time frame. Build that thinking time that we know is essential. You know, during that time, I always, you know, circulate the room when pupils are discussing with the person next to them. And then I use like some cold calling. So when pupils do not put their hand, you know, it's when people do not put their hand up and just I pick who's going to contribute. But also, so some of you might think now, well, I can't do that with some of my pupils, that we put them off. Well, what I do with some pupils like that is that when they actually practice with the person next to them, and because I walk around, I go with, you know, the most maybe a reluctant one and say, that was a fantastic answer, you know the answer. Am I okay to just, you know, ask you to answer in front of everyone? And most of the time they're fine, because you've given them that reassurance that they got the right answer and they did it right. And that's just helping, as I said, just building, you know, that confidence. So as I said, you know, using timers can be very powerful and can easily be incorporated in all you know, your PowerPoints, because it gives as well that structure for the pupils. They know that they've got that time to do it. And it's also a bit that sense of urgency, because they can easily then be away with the ferries and so on. Then when using mini whiteboards, you know, with your class, if it's to check pupils' understanding, ensure that pupils do not put their board up as soon as they have written the answer, and that they do it only when you tell them to, because otherwise, well, some pupils will just copy the answers from everyone's. You know, I've got so many you know, students who are so keen, they write the answer and they, you know, they put it up. But no, I don't want that. I want everyone to think, and I need to see as a teacher, if I'm using the mini whiteboards to check for pupils' understanding, I need to make sure that they all put the board at the same time, and they're just copied, you know, from each other. And by doing that, we can monitor the class and see, you know, who needs as well a bit more time to finish writing their answer. And then I always do like a countdown, so everyone shows their board at the same times. And as I said, you just avoid the pupils just copying, from each other. Allow as well from low stakes assessment, which are accessible and planned with all pupils in mind, so they can all experience success. Remember, we don't have to give a mark and a grade all the time because that can be demoralizing for our pupils. So think about that low stake assessment as well. It's also important when we talk about SEND to be aware that learning a foreign language can place really high demands on the working memory, and that will be for all our pupils, not only those with, SEND. So working memory refers to our ability to manipulate and remember information over a short period of time, about 2 minutes. So it's very similar to short-term memory, but when we use the term working memory, we are really emphasizing the manipulation of information. So with that in mind, it's really essential that opportunities for overlearning, revisiting, repetition, and application as well are embedded into every lesson. So we know that our working memory is limited in terms of its capacity. So working memory holds a limited amount of information, which actually does vary from one learner to the other one, and that limited amount of information is being held for a short amount of time, whilst the mental effort is given to work on that on that specific information. So as MFL teachers, we need to think about the amount of vocabulary, for example, we introduce at once. If you introduce 20 words at once, well, more likely the pupils will never be able to remember, as many. So how do you break that down? But we also need to consider about the amount of instructions we give alongside it, because sometimes it's not only about the vocabulary that we introduce or the grammar point that we introduce, but it's all the instructions that we give alongside to it. So information in working memory can be lost if the pupils are distracted, or if they are, like, for example, overloaded with information to work on. So what can we do as languages teachers to support the pupils with their working memory? Well, first of all, make sure that they are paying attention. So don't start explaining something if you notice that some of your pupils are not, they're not paying that attention. Remind them what we have previously taught them and making the link. Well, actually, now we're moving to that because what we've learned before is going to help us, with the next bit that we're going to, to cover. I always make all my vocabulary list available for every lesson so the pupils can easily refer to it. So we use knowledge organizers, so you might want to do that. Check that pupils, understand the first part before you move on to the next, because otherwise, well, that they're not going to get, to get it. And also to reduce the cognitive load, ensure that the pupils have the knowledge they need before asking them to give us a detailed answer in the target language. So helping the pupils making the link between previous and new learning is really important. And I've put as well, the last bullet point is about breaking down the learning and instructions into small chunks. So we tend to do that naturally, but we also need to chunk the instructions. We do it really, really well, I think, as languages teachers in terms of the content that we introduce, but we also need to remember to do that with our own instructions. And I think that, thinking of breaking it down by either giving one instruction at a time or waiting for pupils to have done that first bit before they move to the next one, and so on. So to avoid overload, when we are presenting new learning, we need to strip out unnecessary layers of distraction, and we should avoid asking pupils to listen and read simultaneously. However, this, in languages, I know that when I introduce vocabulary, I've got a picture, the word, in the target language, and I will say that word. So they will listen to it, they can see how it's written, and they can have a picture that goes with it. I use the Noun project quite a lot. It's a free website that you can use. All the images, and there's loads of diagrams as well. They're really good for your dual coding. and all the images are really, really good, but also they are very inclusive. So like, for example, if you type the word family, you will have all sorts of families. So you'll have mom, dad, and kid. You might have two moms and a kid. You might have two dads with a kid, you know, and so it's very inclusive as well. And they are very simple graphics in black and white. And as I said, it's very inclusive and that can really help your pupils with SEND, but also all the others as well. So really, when using dual coding, it's important to be consistent and always using the same image for the same thing. So like, for example, if you use, I don't know, a picture, okay, you teach the topic of town and you introduce, you know, dans ma ville, il y a un château. So in my town, there is a castle. So whatever picture you're going to use for that castle, well, make sure that you always use the same one, because that's going to help, you know, your pupils, and it's also going to avoid any possible ambiguity. Visuals are also useful when teaching grammar, and here is an example that I use when I teach the comparative. So when I teach the comparative, I use a burger, okay? Well, not a real one, obviously, but the picture that you can see. So my bread is my more than. So the top one is going to be either more or less, and the other piece of bread is going to be than. And in the middle, we know that we need something in the middle of our burger. We don't only eat, you know, the bread. So in the middle, I've got, for example, here my adjective, because here for that specific example, I'm teaching them the comparative. So I'll practice it with the class, and then, you know, we will look at it in sentences. So you will ask pupils to find it in a sentence so that you can see, they can recognize it. And again, at first, I've got that visual. So using the picture as well, just to help the pupils, you know, remember. And then gradually I will remove that support. But many of the activities that we use to learn a foreign language effectively, you know, for example, speaking out loud, or risk-taking, or making mistakes, and so on, can feel like quite worrying for some learners. So building in opportunities through low-stakes activities such as pair work, games in small groups, all class calling out, can support the learners to develop their confidence, alongside actually giving them opportunities to commit, you know, that acquired knowledge to their long-term memory. This is something that we've started to do in our school last year, and it's called the Now and Next strategy. And to be honest, before last year, I didn't know about that strategy, but actually it's very, very powerful. And the Now and Next strategies can help some of your SEND pupils. And it's a visual strategy to help the pupil understand and complete desired task. And it's almost like a list of things to do one at a time, but at least the pupils know what is coming next. So like, for example, I thought about my MFL lessons, and I've created some Now and Next. So I've got 3 different ones. For example, this one is just like for a normal lesson. So they know that as soon as they come in, the pupils need to put equipment on the desk, open their book, complete the do now task. Then they know that I'm going to give them some instructions. They know then that we do the greetings, so comment ça va or como estás in Spanish. Then they know that we're going to introduce some vocabulary. So I've got one, like, for example, when I introduce vocabulary. Then I've got to do now when we do an assessment, because obviously the do now is going to be different. The Now and Next strategy will be different. I've got one as well when I do, you know, pair work or group, you know, of group work. But again, it is something that might help some of your pupils who are struggling with the unknown, and they don't, you know, some pupils do not cope with the unexpected and what's going to happen. So here, something that they've got in front of them, and it's just helping them knowing what's going to come next. We use a lot of scaffolding in teaching so that pupils can accomplish, you know, new tasks and concepts they could not typically, you know, achieve on their own. And pupils can refer to knowledge organizers, sentence builders, writing, speaking French, checklists of what to include, or even checklists to help them proofread. So here, the ones that I've put on the slide is like a checklist that I used. So this one is an example for my Key Stage 4 when they've done the 90-word question for AQA. This is a checklist to help them proofread, because my pupils, whether they're SEND or not, they do not know how to proofread unless I give them specific things to do. So here's just a checklist of about what they need to do. Very easy. I always use the same one because it will be applicable all the time. But at least, for example, as you can see, I want them to check specific spelling of words that I know every single time they spell wrong. And I know it will be exactly the same, you know, for your pupils. But then if they're on the writing, there's still a spelling mistake. When I've asked them to proofread it, believe me, they will have to copy it a lot of time, because it means that they will not have proofread, you know, properly. Another example of scaffolding could be to give pupils an example of a 90-word question, and pupils must analyze it by identifying, you know, the connectives, the adjectives, you know, opinion phrases, time phrases, the present, past, future tenses, as well as, you know, when other people are mentioned, so that it's not only the subject pronoun I, but also they can use, you know, he, she, they, and so on. But by spending time on the model answer and taking it apart by analyzing it, then pupils know and understand what they need to include. So that could be quite powerful to use that. Or using a structure strip. I use that as well. I design it with quite a lot of information first about what they could include, and you could also tell the pupils, like, for example, even the tense that they should include, or maybe suggest some vocabulary for them to use. But as I said before, what is really, really key is at some point just to remove that, you know, that scaffolding. Here in a recent conference, Ben, who you can follow on, I was going to say on Twitter, but on X, shared, you know, frames that you can use for spoken and written work, as they provide pupils with a structure of adding why, because we know it's so important in our subject for pupils to give that why all the time. So here is an example that, you know, that you can use. So provide pupils with a complex structure so that they are using it and building confidence in using them. And as you can see, there are some examples of subjunctives as well. That is very hard, but pupils are being used to it because it's the same format all the time. So it almost becomes like automatic, you know, for them. Another way to support pupils is to give them, like, for example, the beginning of the sentence when doing a translation from English to the target language. And you could you know, support your pupils by just writing the first letter, for example, of each word in the target language. Or you could also have some pictures to help the pupils fill in the gaps. So, you know, it's just going to help them from them about what they could include. Then I also created, and you can have access to all of that as well. And it's got those bookmarks in French, Spanish, and German. And those bookmarks are really to support pupils with their writing about, you know, what to include, how they can improve their sentences and so on. And again, that could be a good scaffold to help your, you know, your pupils. But as I said, you know, be very mindful of heavy cognitive demands on as well the listening and the reading. So the listening and the reading can also be scaffolded, and you can easily do that. So, like, for example, you could have pupils annotating the sentence builder or your knowledge organizer to support the pronunciation and also that phonics awareness, which we know is really important now with the new GCSE. Pupils highlight the sentence the teacher is reading or writing it down. Pupils repeat after the teacher, or you start the sentence and the students finish it. Pupils, you know, follow the transcript while listening. You know, when we do listening activities, you know, we don't always have to use the listening without using the transcript. The transcript can be a really good scaffold to help the pupils and build that confidence. You ask pupils to only listen for certain words, you know, for example, also that could be, you know, a scaffold. But as I said earlier, you know, once the pupils are able to complete or master the task, the scaffolding needs to be gradually removed, and then the responsibility of learning shifts from the teacher to, you know, the pupil, and it's essential to, you know, remove that scaffolding at some point. Also thinking about what we can do in MFL to support the pupils remembering and trying to find information for that. So remember, the drilling, the repeating, the chanting are really successful, strategies. You could have, the first letter of each word, just again, that will remind the pupils about what it is without giving them, the full answer. And at the end of the day, it's just finding any hook for learning that will help the students. Like, for example, last year, I had a pupil who could not remember how to spell mourir, to die in French, and would always put double R instead of one R for mourir. So I said to her, I said, well, when you die, you only die once. So because you only die once, mourir's got only one R. And it was a simple little thing. But then she knew that mourir was only spelled with, one R. So she was one of my, really high ability pupils. But at the end of the day, it's just like finding any hook to help the pupils remember. So it could be mnemonics, for example. My pupils really struggle with beaucoup, spelling beaucoup in French, because there are so many vowels. So we've got a mnemonic that was used years and years and years ago in my previous school, but even now help the pupils. And it's beautiful elephant, always use condoms on ugly penguins. So first of all, it makes the pupils, laugh, but then they remember how to spell beaucoup. They remember, the order of the vowels, and they don't forget that that they usually, forget in beaucoup. Or it could be, if your pupils struggle to retain vocabulary, as I said, give them a vocab list, plan for more repetition, space out as well the vocabulary learning, and encourage a little and often approach to vocabulary retrieval. Explicitly, model and discuss vocabulary learning strategies. What is the best way to learn the vocabulary? Enable as well structured and well-resourced vocabulary learning at home, which guides the pupils through the stages involving vocabulary learning, and also support the parents and carers to support their child. So for example, to just illustrate that, I'm going to show you an example of a 5-day French homework. The first time, a couple of years ago, I've asked one of my year 7s to learn, 10 phrases in French when we've introduced the greetings. And oh my goodness me, they knew really well how to say it, but the spelling were atrocious because they didn't know how to practice the spelling of the French words. So then I said, okay, I need to go back to basics. And I've used Danielle strategies here that I've shown on the board. So they had to practice every single day, and at the end of the week, it was becoming a lot more challenging. But at first, it was just completing a couple of letters, then more, then even more, and so on. But then when they redid that vocab test, it was so much better. They've really improved because they understood how to learn. You could also support pupils developing their conceptual understanding. So again, using pictures, visuals, to complement that auditory work, and as a stimulus for the production of speech as well. So that will not only help with the listening, but also with the speaking. Ensure that the grammar is recycled in the curriculum regularly and is well sequenced to build knowledge of language effectively. So don't introduce, for example, the full paradigm of the verb, but just maybe like do first and second subject pronoun first. When the pupils are really used with that, then later on you introduce another one, and so on. And again, as I kept repeating in that webinar, is ensuring that enough practice is being given and making sure that you model and scaffold when appropriate, and also trying to make explicit links to structures within their home language as well. We've got loads of EEL pupils in my school, so making the links as well with their home language where appropriate to support them to identify and make those links. So really to reflect on this session, just a couple, 3 questions actually for you to reflect on. It's first of all, well, do you know the targets of your SEND pupils in the classroom? How do you support pupils in your lesson? And remember, everything that you're going to do for your pupils with SEND will help all pupils, because it's all to do with an inclusive classroom. and if we are inclusive, that's for all our pupils. And also maybe, are there any strategies that I've introduced today that you've not done, or maybe not done in a very long time, that you're going to try or re-implement? I can see that I've got questions in the chat. So I've got, do you use dual coding for Key Stage 4? I use it Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4. Yes, I use it, you know, for both of them. Not in every single lesson, but when appropriate. And then the other questions that I've got is, what do you think about an EL student with a very low level of English who is then asked to do another language, French or Spanish or both, so third or fourth language? Okay. Personally, because obviously I don't know the context of your own school, but I know personally I would not withdraw an EAL student, because although sometimes, yes, their level of English is extremely low, but actually they might really, really surprise you in French, Spanish, or German, because they will make the link with their own language. And also what I say to, you know, in my school, the way we're looking at it is that actually when all the pupils start learning French or starting Spanish, well, they all become almost like EAL, because they're all almost like, well, let's try to speak as much, you know, French, Spanish as possible. And if we don't make as many links, you know, with English, if we try to speak as much as possible in French or Spanish, they might actually be absolutely fine. Or sometimes when you really have to explain something in English that you know that they might struggle, can they maybe have, you know, like a little translation? I know we use like little tablets, just so that, you know, some of our pupils who have just joined the country and joined us in our school, they can use. But personally, I would not withdraw them. And actually, when I look at my GCSE results, my EL pupils always do really, really, really well. But as I said, I don't know your context, so I'm not sure if that answer did help you or not. I'm just conscious of time. Thank you very, very much, everyone, for attending my session. I'm doing another session at 2:30, but this time about feedback and not marking. So if you are interested, please join me at 2:30. If you would like a copy of the presentation, I'm more than happy to send it to you. You can contact me on X, or Twitter, whatever, and my email address is also on the slide. But thank you very much, everyone. Have a lovely afternoon, and hope to see you soon.